All right, get ready, you guys, because today we are diving deep into the world of Cinderella. But, forget the whole once upon a time thing. We're talking fairytale forensics here. Time to break out the magnifying glass.
Yeah, we're going to uncover all those little details, those hidden layers we might have totally missed before. To really get into it all, though, it helps to have a basic summary of the story as it's presented in these sources.
Cinderella is a young woman living under the cruel control of her wicked stepmother and selfish stepsisters, who force her to work as a servant in her own home. Despite her hardships, Cinderella remains kind-hearted and hopeful. When the king announces a royal ball to find a bride for the prince, Cinderella dreams of attending. Her stepmother forbids her, but a fairy godmother appears, magically transforming a pumpkin into a carriage, mice into horses, and Cinderella's rags into a stunning gown, complete with glass slippers. The fairy godmother warns that the spell will break at midnight. At the ball, Cinderella captivates the prince, and they dance the night away. As the clock strikes 12, she flees, leaving behind a single glass slipper. The prince searches the kingdom for the mysterious woman who fits the slipper. Despite her stepmother's interference, Cinderella tries on the slipper, which fits perfectly, revealing her as the prince's true love. She marries the prince, leaving her life of servitude behind to live happily ever after. The stepsisters are subjected to brutal punishments for their cruelty. During Cinderella's wedding to the prince, doves peck out their eyes, leaving them blind. Additionally, their feet are cut to try to fit into the glass slipper, causing them severe pain and permanent disfigurement.
Okay, so we've got Cinderella, this kind young woman, but stuck with a wicked stepmother and stepsisters. Chores, mistreatment, the whole deal.
Okay, let's start with the stepmother. She's usually painted as the villain, right? Straight up evil. The stepmother's cruelty, is it really just about beauty?
Yeah.
Or is there something more there? Why was she so focused on Cinderella, and why was she so mean? Yeah.
We're really going to try to understand the relationship between Cinderella and her stepmother, Lady Tremaine. So to put it into context for our listeners, what was it about Cinderella that made her such a perceived threat?
All right, so picture this. You're a woman in Cinderella's era. Your security, your entire future, basically your everything, hinges on your ability to marry well.
Women were often valued primarily for their marriageability. A good marriage, that was their key to security, to social standing.
And it's not just you, it's magnified tenfold for your daughters.
Yeah.
Now enter Cinderella. Even dressed in rags, she possesses a natural beauty and charm that could, and let's be honest, probably would, attract a suitor. But potentially a very wealthy suitor at that.
So now imagine you're the stepmother, right? Cinderella's very existence was a threat to her own daughter's chances of securing a good match.
Precisely. This wasn't just about being mean for sport. It was about survival, or at least that's how it would have felt to Lady Tremaine. She was fighting, in the way she knew how, to secure her daughter's futures in a world where women have very limited options. So, yeah, pretty high stakes.
And that makes her behavior more understandable, but not necessarily justifiable, right?
Exactly. It's like we can acknowledge the social pressures that might have led her there,
Right.
but it doesn't excuse the cruelty.
Right. Think about it. In lots of cultures, stepmothers were seen as outsiders, threats to the family structure. And you have Cinderella, this beautiful young woman, even though she's treated poorly, she's kind, she's beautiful. She represents a threat, basically, to everything that the stepmother's trying to achieve for her own daughters.
So essentially, the stepmother's being driven by this really, intense social anxiety.
Yeah. A society that puts beauty and marriage above everything else. Cinderella, with her natural charm and kindness, she actually starts to seem like a threat, not just to the stepsisters, but to the stepmother's whole world. Her status, her security, everything.
It's less about her being evil and more about her being a woman trapped by the expectations and limitations of her world.
Exactly. She's desperate to secure a future for her daughters in a system that feels rigged against them. By keeping Cinderella down, she's trying to control everything. Her household, her place in society, all of it.
Wow. It's like they say, every villain has a backstory. How does she even begin to try and, grapple with that?
Yeah.
And control the situation?
Right.
So we see this really drastic shift in the way that Cinderella is treated after her father passes away,
Absolutely.
right? Like night and day.
It's this huge transformation, and she almost goes from being, this beloved daughter to, almost invisible in the household.
Hmm.
And, I think the imagery that's used is really powerful here. So, forcing Cinderella into these servant roles, covering her in cinders, they even give her a nickname based on ashes.
Cinderella.
Cinderella, exactly. And it all kind of serves to lower her status to make her seem less appealing, especially in comparison to the stepsisters.
I know. It's heartbreaking. Yeah, even as a kid, I always remember being really struck by that imagery of Cinderella, like
Yeah.
covered in ashes.
Yeah.
And it just feels so deeply unfair.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have this whole drama with the Prince's Ball,
Right.
which just seems to amplify the stepmother's cruelty, doesn't it?
Absolutely, because that's where all of her anxieties come to a head. Because it's not just a party, right? It's a public display. It's a chance for these young women to be seen by all of society, including, of course, potential suitors.
Yeah, it's like their big debut.
Exactly. And so you see every single time Cinderella gets close to being ready, whether she's, finishing her chores, finding something suitable to wear, the stepmother changes the rules.
Always moving the goalposts.
Exactly. Cinderella's one shot at escaping her terrible situation, and her stepmother, well, she pulls out all the stops to keep her away.
Right, those impossible tasks, the constantly shifting deadlines. Oh, it's awful. And let's not forget the ripping of that makeshift gown that she makes.
Oh, yes!
This being
So cruel.
Talk about cruel. That was calculated.
It's like she knew exactly what she was doing.
Yeah, it was like she was deliberately trying to break Cinderella's spirit at that point.
I think so, yeah. I think she was determined to make sure that her daughters had every possible advantage, even if it meant crushing Cinderella in the process. Break her spirit, rob her of any hope for a better future. She couldn't bear the thought of Cinderella, even in a beautiful dress, captivating the prince, showcasing her inherent worth.
Because what would that say about her daughters? That they weren't enough. That's a tough pill to swallow, especially in a society so fixated on marriage and status.
It's like Cinderella's potential happiness was a direct threat to her stepmother's carefully constructed reality.
It's messed up, but it makes a weird kind of sense,
In a twisted fairy tale kind of way, yeah.
Okay, but we can't forget the fairy godmother. Talk about wish fulfillment, right? One of your sources actually takes a look at her magic through a scientific lens. I'm really curious about this one.
It's wild they're suggesting these transformations, like the pumpkin carriage, the mice turning into horses, that it would all require super advanced genetic manipulation.
Any basis for these transformations, you think?
Scientific basis might be pushing it. But we can try, right? Let's take the carriage. We're talking changing a pumpkin to a vehicle. That's molecular manipulation like CRISPR, that gene editing technology, as a potential, and I say potential very loosely here.
CRISPR. Okay, I've heard of it, but to be honest, I'm a little fuzzy on the specifics.
Basically, it lets scientists target and change DNA sequences. So in the context of Cinderella, imagine if you could rewrite the genetic code of a pumpkin, transform it into a carriage, like literally rearrange its building blocks.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. So the fairy godmother is like some kind of master geneticist.
In a way, look, it's fantastical, obviously, but by grounding it in real-world science, even just as a thought experiment, it helps us wrap our heads around the sheer scale of those transformations.
So not just reshaping, but like changing what it's made of.
Yeah, the energy for that would be insane.
Okay, so we got a carriage, but it needs horses.
And it's gotta work. We're talking bones, muscles, like fast-forwarding evolution, accelerated growth. It's be like winning the genetic lottery, but instantly.
That fairy godmother needs to teach a class or something. But Cinderella's makeover, those clothes don't just appear.
You're right. Maybe self-assembling fabrics, changing at the tiniest level for those luxurious vibes. But there's a catch. Midnight, the deadline. Cinderella runs, loses the slipper, and, well, the prince, he goes on a kingdom-wide hunt for the foot that fits.
So Cinderella's high-tech, even her shoes, it's wild. But magic has limits. It disappears at midnight. What? Some kind of timer. It's like some kind of magical expiration date built right in. Makes sense for a story, right? Adds drama, reminds us it's not forever. But scientifically, how could that work?
Good question. One thought, it's like quantum stuff, Those transformed objects, they're in this temporary state, balanced. Then something disrupts it, time runs out, poof, back to normal.
So it's like a self-destruct sequence.
Huh.
Clever. Any other ways to think about it, though, science-wise? I mean,
Yeah, definitely. Energy, right? Keeping all that magic going forever. Talk about draining. Midnight, maybe it's a safety feature.
so like a magical power surge, got to prevent that. The fairy godmother, she's not just powerful, but responsible, huh?
Exactly. Or, and this is where it gets cool, what if it's deliberate? Like a forensic timer in the spell itself. Gonna wear off, no trace, at this exact moment.
Like a fairy tale time bomb. Sneaky.
Can we talk about the glass slipper? It's this iconic symbol of romance, but your sources see it a bit differently. They say it's actually kind of problematic. So what's the big deal with the slipper? Why is it causing so much debate?
For one thing, that whole slipper test, as romantic as it seems, boils Cinderella down to a single physical attribute. It ignores her intelligence, her kindness, everything that makes her unique and, honestly, worthy of love. It's like they're saying your shoe size defines you. Not exactly the deepest message about what really matters.
I know, right? I mean, it just seems a little superficial, don't you think? The whole shoe thing.
Just a shoe.
The whole thing hinges on her shoe size. You gotta wonder about the prince's methods. And the sources really dig into that shallowness. They argued the slipper reinforces these unrealistic beauty standards and completely ignores real connection, shared values, all the things that make a relationship strong. And the prince just assumed everyone had the same chance to go to the ball, to be seen.
Right, like Cinderella's situation didn't matter.
Exactly.
What about her intelligence, her kindness? She seemed pretty cool, even if she was stuck cleaning all the time.
Exactly. It's playing into these narrow beauty standards like, oh, you have tiny feet, you must be the one.
Yeah, not cool. And what about all the other women in the kingdom? Just because their feet are a little bigger, they're out of luck.
It just reinforces this power dynamic, right? You've got this prince offering a ticket to a life of privilege, and it all comes down to this arbitrary shoe test.
So are you saying we should just, cancel Cinderella? Throw the whole story out?
No, not at all. It's not about erasing these stories. It's about engaging with them critically, you know?
So how else could he have found her? There's got to be a better way than the foot measuring contest.
Exactly. Or what if instead of the prince going on a kingdom-wide foot fetish quest, he just hosts another ball? Give Cinderella the agency to reveal herself on her own terms.
Now that's what I call a power move. It puts the choice back in her hands.
What if the prince, instead of focusing on physical objects, he asks around about Cinderella's character? Like, hey, do you know anyone who's super kind and compassionate, who's always willing to help out, even when times are tough? Imagine that. A prince who values inner beauty, instead of the object, focus on, their talk, their connection.
Right, like who was the witty one, not whose foot fits.
Exactly. He could have had another event, a chance for, a real connection.
I gotta say, thinking about these old fairy tales this way, it's really got me looking at them differently. Like the Fairy Godmother as a geneticist. That's wild. Things get kind of dark in some of these Cinderella versions, especially like the stepfamily's punishment.
Yeah. Talk about intense consequences. We see this difference a lot. The modern, nicer versions and the older, harsher ones.
Yeah, the Grimm brothers version doesn't hold back.
Not one bit.
Cutting off toes, heels, all to fit the shoe. Dedication, right?
And their reward, dancing at Cinderella's wedding in, get this, red-hot iron shoes. Until they die.
Now that's a consequence that makes you think twice. Is it just a different time? Or could this ending be saying something more?
It's easy to say, oh, different times. But these darker elements, they often had a purpose. It's a different view on justice, like instant karma, but way more intense.
So it's like they mess with the balance, and that ending was a warning, Don't try that at home, kid.
Yeah, exactly. Like in the Grimm brothers version, the stepsisters, they don't just get called out for their cruelty. They're forced to dance in red-hot iron shoes. Ouch. A little different from a pumpkin carriage and a fairy godmother, right?
Yeah, not exactly a bedtime story. It reminds you these stories weren't always meant for kids.
Think about being forced to dance in those shoes.
That's a whole other level of cruelty.
It's brutal.
The psychological torture on top of the physical pain.
Back then, swift and severe justice was just how things worked.
And speaking of different perspectives, you found some really interesting alternate Cinderella endings. Some that are a far cry from the traditional happily ever after.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's this one Chinese folktale where Cinderella forgives her stepmother and stepsisters. She doesn't try to get revenge or anything. She uses her new position to help them, actually. Shows that sometimes compassion and forgiveness are more powerful than holding a grudge.
I like that. It challenges the idea that a happy ending always means the bad guys get what they deserve. Maybe true happiness comes from breaking that cycle.
It really makes you think about what a happy ending even means, It might be more than just a big wedding. Maybe it's about self-reflection, forgiveness, and breaking free from the past.
I love it. Now that's a fairy tale ending I can get behind. But it makes you wonder, why are all these darker, kind of messed up elements present in so many of these stories? It can't just be coincidence.
It's a question that's, kept scholars busy for ages. There's no easy answer, but one theory is that these stories, they act as cautionary tales. They're warning kids about the very real dangers of the world and how adults, well, they don't always have all the answers.
So it's like these fairy tales. They're holding up a mirror to, the anxieties and the realities of the time. Kind of makes you think.
It does.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and as always, keep an eye out for Fairytale Forensics.